This tutorial will continue where we left off from the previous tutorial on simple basic interactions in Unity. So now we're going to add some player feedback to our interactions. So as a reminder of where we left off, we have an interaction for picking up a coin, and we have a variable keeping track of how many coins we've picked up. We also have health potions, which don't do anything if you're at full health, but if you step on a damage trap, then you can pick up a health potion to make your health go back up. And we have a door, which you can't walk through normally, but if you go and pick up a key, then you can open the door and walk through. So let's make these interactions a little more interesting. We can do that with particle effects, sound effects, animations, and UI elements. So the first one I'm going to do is I'm going to add some animations. And the first one I'm going to do is going to be an animation that will play all the time. It's to make the coins spin so that it draws a little bit more attention to them and makes it a little more clear what those are. I'm going to first make a new folder called Animations. And this is, as always, this is to help keep our folder structure organized so it's easy to find things. And in here, I'm going to create a new animation. So I'm just going to right click and create animation. And make sure you select animation, not animator controller or animator controller override. We just want a regular animation. And it should have this little play button when you first create it. And let's call it spin. I like to call my animations based on what they're going to do. And so this is going to be for the coin spinning. So I'll select one of the coins, and if you take your animation and you drag it down to the bottom where it says add component, if you let go, it creates a new component down here called an animator. And this animator is linked to this animation. And you can see that link in the animator window. If you don't have a tab up here for the animator window, you can find it under Window, Animator. And that's this window here, and we can see here it has this spin animation. Animators are basically they're the way Unity controls which animation an object is going to play. And you could have multiple animations in here, and you could set transitions between them, and you could trigger different animations to play. But for now, it just has one animation, and if that animation is orange, that means it's going to play by default. So as soon as this object comes into existence, it's going to play this animation. So if we go back to our scene and select our coin that has the animator on it, now we can actually make this animation happen. So now let's open the animation window. Before we were working in the animator window to see the links between the animations. Now we're going to go to the animation window, which is what actually allows us to make keyframes. The keyframes are what tells the animation the different poses that the object should be in, and then it animates smoothly between those poses. So we can add a property here with this Add Property button. And if we go under Transform, we can see some options. Anything we have in this list are things that we can animate, but we're going to start just with some transform animations. And we're going to start with the rotation. Depending on your screen size, if you don't see the pluses, you might actually have a little scroll bar at the bottom to scroll over. But you want to hit this little plus button next to rotation. And if we drag along here, we can, this is called scrubbing along the timeline. So we can scrub along the timeline. And normally if our keyframes are different, we would see the object changing. But these two keyframes actually have the exact same values right now. So it's not changing. So if we go down here to the end and we select this keyframe, and I've also positioned my timeline position on this keyframe, and I'm going to toggle open my rotation values. And we need to know which one we're changing. So if we want to just grab one of these axes, we can rotate around and see which axis is changing here. And we can see that it's the y-axis. So what I'm going to do here is change my y-axis to 360. Oops. let's try that again. It's trying to take the value that I've spun it to on here. So let's try 360. And now when we scrub along the timeline, we can see that animation happen. You can also hit play to watch the animation. And now one thing to notice here is that it's not spinning continuously, it's kind of gradually speeding up and then it's slowing down at the end. And if we wanted it to have a smooth continuous motion, we can go to the Curves tab, and if you select one of your values and press F, that brings it into focus. And so here we can see this sort of curve shape here is what's causing it to gradually pick up speed, and then this curve at the end is causing it to gradually slow down. So if we just drag, if you select one of the keyframes here and you drag these lines, you can make the curve be a straight line or close to a straight line. It doesn't have to be perfect. But now it will have a continuous rotation. Now the one other thing we need to do is we want this animation to loop. So if you select your spin animation in the folder, you can check this box here for loop time. And now our coin will animate, but we haven't applied this change to the prefab, so none of the other coins have it yet. So I'm going to select this coin that we've been working with and hit the apply button. So now all of the coins will have this animation on them. So now we can see our coins are animating, and it makes it just a little bit easier to spot them and understand what they are. Now I want to add something when I pick up the coin. So I'm going to play a particle effect and a sound effect when I pick up the coin. So to do that, I'm going to use resources. In Unity, the resources folder is a way that you can load something into the scene while the game is running. So let's go ahead and create a new folder called resources. This is the one folder where it's really important that you spell it correctly and that you capitalize. So it needs resources with a capital R, and it's plural resources, so it ends in S. Now I'm going to create in the scene, I'm going to create the effect that I want to use to put in my resources folder. So I'm going to create an empty game object, and I'm going to add a particle system. And we can see, if I bring it up out of the ground a little bit, we can see here's the particle system, and it has these purple magenta squares. So that's because it doesn't have a material applied yet. If we go to the renderer tab at the bottom, we can select a material. And we only have, by default, we have one particle material. You can also find particle materials on the Unity Asset Store, or you can create your own, but I'm just going to use the default one for now. Now I'm going to make some changes to how these particles are spawning. So let's look at the shape tab first. Here we can see the shape is a cone, and so it's sending the particles inside of this cone and shooting them outward. So let's change this to a sphere. So now the particles are going in every direction. And I'm going to change the emission. So for an effect like this, we want maybe just one quick burst of particles. We don't want this continuous drifting happening. So I'm going to change my rate over time to 0. And I'm going to go to the bursts category down here and hit the plus. So now it has one burst, and 30 might be too many. Let's do 15. And now I want to make this happen a little bit quicker and just not travel so far, but be a little bit more abrupt. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the lifetime to 1. And I generally set the duration and the lifetime to the same so that I can see them looping better. Although when we're done, we're going to turn off looping, so it won't actually matter what our duration is. So now, let's see. Let's make these particles a little bit smaller. So we have our start size. Let's do 0.3. And one of the most useful things is color over lifetime, which allows you to have it fade from invisible and fade into a solid color. So the bottom one is the color, and the top one is the alpha. So I'm going to add a alpha here in the center, which is going to be 255, and then my two alphas on the ends are going to be invisible. So now they'll fade in and out, so they won't just appear out of nowhere. And I'm also going to change their color. Just up here in the top section, I'm just going to change the main color to yellow. And I want the start speed a little bit slower because they're traveling just a little bit too far. So let's try 2. Let's try 3. Okay. So now I want to add a sound effect. So this is going to be the particle effect for when I pick up a coin. And now I want to add a sound effect. So I've gone ahead and imported a sound effect that I had, and you can find one. You can use one that you've already got on your computer, or you can find a sound effect online or on the Unity Asset Store. So I've just got this coin sound effect, and I'm going to go back to my particle effect object and scroll to the bottom, and we'll do add component audio source, and we'll leave this set checked as play on awake, and then just drag your sound effect into the audio clip slot at the top. And I'm going to go back to my particle effect and uncheck this box for looping so that it will not play the looping effect. So now we have a sound effect and a particle effect on this game object. So I'm going to put it in my resources folder, and I'm going to name it effect and drag it into the resources folder. And now I'm actually going to delete it from my scene. Then in my script, I'm going to go to where I am collecting the coin. And I'm going to create that effect in the scene. So to do that, we're going to call instantiate. And then instantiate will instantiate whatever object you pass to it. So you give it an object and it creates that object in the scene. If you want to use an object that's in your resources folder, the way you do that is with resources.load, and then you tell it the name of the effect or the name of the thing that you have in your folder, which I named effect. Then you need to tell it where you want to instantiate it. So we're going to give it a position and a rotation. So I want to instantiate it where my coin is, and the coin is other. So we're going to do other dot transform dot position and other dot transform dot rotation. And so end that with a parenthesis and a semicolon. Now we can save our script and we can see it in action. So the sound effect is working really well. The particle effect is just a little bit hard to see. So one of the things we can do about that, let's bring our effect back into our scene so we can take a look. And one of the things that's making it a little difficult to see is the particles are just they're already too far outside of the center of the circle by the time we can see them. So let's go back to our shape section, and we can change the radius of our sphere and the radius thickness. And then if we hit play, we can see that they're actually starting from the center. The other thing we can do is we can add gravity to this and increase our speed again. So we lowered the speed because they were getting a little bit too far away. But if we turn on gravity, and the larger the number, the heavier or the more gravity will be affected. So 1 will be a pretty heavy effect. That's a little bit too much. So let's do 0.25. Let's do a little bit heavier than that. Let's try 0.5. And then we can also have our start speed a little higher. So let's try 5 for the start speed. And actually, let's try 1 now for the gravity with the higher start speed. No, 1 is still too heavy. Let's do 0.75. Alright, so that's starting to look a little bit better. Okay, so now we select our effect and hit apply so that it changes the prefab in our resources folder. And we can delete that. And now let's try and see if that's better. So that's looking a little better. Alright, so the next thing we want to do is add an animation to the door when we open it. So right now when we pick up our key, we just destroy the door when we walk into it. And instead of destroying the door, let's make an animation for the door. So let's go into our animations folder and make a new animation. And I'm going to call this one door open. And then select the door and drag this door open animation to the bottom where it says add component. And it will create the animator component for us. Now this time we're actually going to modify the animator component. So we have this door open animation by default. And what we want to do is, instead of playing this by default, we actually want to trigger when this is going to happen. So by default, we don't want to play anything. So what we can do is we can create an empty state and then right click on this state and set as layer default state. So now this one is orange, so it will play by default. And so now we can do make transition, drag it down to the door open. And now this transition can have a condition for it. So in our parameters tab, so up here we have layers and parameters. In our parameters tab, if we hit plus, we can create a new trigger. And I'm going to call it open. And then with this transition selected, under conditions down here, we can hit plus. And it will show us all of the conditions we have as options, and open is the only one, so I'm going to use that. And I'm going to uncheck the box for has exit time. Has exit time says that whenever this animation is finished, it should play this animation right away. And we don't want that to happen. We want to just stay here in this empty state and wait for the trigger to happen. So now we need to actually create that animation. So we have it connected to our door, but we need to actually create the keyframes. So let's go to the animation window and set property. And this time we're going to use position. And once again, I'm going to go down here to this end frame. And I'm going to adjust the Y position. You can also just, instead of typing a number, if you hover over the edge, you can drag. It'll give you these little arrows. You can drag to adjust the position. And so now, when I scrub along the timeline, I can see that animation happen. Or I can hit play and watch that happen. And this time, we are not going to set it to loop. So we just want it to run once. Now we need to actually trigger that animation in our script. So I'm going to go back to my script. And I'm going to go to the door section. So if the other tag is door and it has the key, or the player has the key, instead of destroying the door, I'm going to do other.getComponent. This is how we access the different components on an object. And I'm going to get the animator component, and this goes in corner brackets. And then I'm going to do set trigger. And then in quotes, we tell it the name of the trigger. And this is the trigger that we set in the animator, which I called open. So let's call this open. And now we can test it out. so first let's make sure we still can't open it without the key. Now we go over here and pick up the key. And now my door animates open so I can walk through it. Now the last thing we're going to do is we're going to add a damage meter at the top, or a health meter, so that we can see how much health the player has. So to do this, we're going to actually create a UI object. So I'm going to go to UI, and I'm going to use a slider for this. Now a slider in the UI is allows you to drag the slider object or the slider bar up and down, but it happens to be really convenient to use to show a meter filling up. So what we can do is, actually here we can see it like this. So what we can do is we can change the color of our background. And so if we go down here to the background, actually, let's go like halfway like this. So we can change our background color to some sort of reddish color, and then we'll have the slider color, the fill area. So this is the color of the actual slider filled area. And we can change this to green. And then we can turn off the handle. And so now what we have is, if I select the slider, this value down here you can drag. So now I can see that this bar can fill up from empty all the way up to full. And you'll notice it doesn't go all the way up because normally the handle is there. So we can adjust the right side of the fill area to 5. And so the left side is already set to 5, so the right side, if we set it to 5, now it will fill perfectly inside of this area. And so now we can see it goes from 0 up to full. So what we want to do is change the health bar to match the numbers that we're using for our health. So we're using an int, which is whole numbers. So I'm going to check this box here, and this makes it so that it snaps between whole numbers. And so I'm going to make my maximum value 100. Oops, sorry, up here, the maximum value I'm going to make 100. And so now I can see that it's always using whole numbers here, but my values now go from 0 to 100. So I'm going to position this bar at the top, and I'm going to also use this this little drop down here. It lets you tell it where to bind to, and I'm going to use this top centered one here. So it's going to bind to the top center of the screen. This will make it this will allow it to adjust its position depending on the screen size that the player is using. So let's move this up here. I'm also going to make it a little bit taller just so it's a little easier to see. And let's make sure the slider still looks okay. Yep, that looks good. All right, so now we have a health bar that we can use in our script. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my player script. And at the top, I'm going to add another public value. And this time I'm going to show you how to link something from the scene to the script. And what we're going to do is we're going to link the slider bar. And to do that, what I need to do is I need to add another using at the top. We're going to use the Unity engine .ui. This will allow us to access functions related to UI elements. And then here I'm going to make a public slider. And without using this Unity UI, we wouldn't be able to create a slider because we wouldn't actually have access to that component type. So I'm going to make a public slider, and I'm going to call this health bar. Then where I'm updating my health, which is happening here in the trap section, what I'm going to do is set my health bar dot value, which is the thing that's actually controlling the slider. So that's this value here. When I drag this, I can see it's controlling the slider. So I'm going to do health bar dot value equals health. And then I also want to do this down here in my health pickup section. I'm going to do it after all of the adjustments have been made. So I'm going to once again do health bar dot value equals health. Now let's see it in action. Oh, and I didn't actually link my health bar. So in order to actually link the health bar to the script, we need to select our player controller object. And here we have the health bar as an empty slot. So we want to drag that slider into that slot so that the script will actually have reference to the slider that's on the screen. So let's try that again. Alright, so now I can see my health going down as I step on the health trap, or on the trap. And if I pick up a health potion, I can see my health goes back up. So the last thing I want to do is display how many coins I've collected. So this is gonna be another canvas object, another UI object. So I'm gonna go game object, UI, and text. And I'm gonna position this right under my health bar. And I'm going to use these options down here under the text component to center the text. And I'm going to change my text color to gold so that it'll sort of match the gold that I'm collecting. And then I'm also going to add an outline component just to make it a little more visible. So this will add a black outline around it. And I'm going to make my font a little bigger. So now what I want to do is adjust this text from a script. So first I'm going to, just so I can see what it's going to look like, I'm going to set this to gold 0. And so this is going to tell me how much gold I've collected. And so now in my script, I want to access this and change it. So just like we did with the slider, we're going to make a public, and this is a text component. So I'm going to do public text, and I'm going to call this gold count. Then when I change my coins collected, so when I'm collecting the coin, what I'm going to do is set my gold count dot text. So the capital T text is the component type. That's this component. Lowercase t text is this value inside of it, so the actual text that it's displaying. So I'm going to do gold count dot text equals, and then in quotes, we want to still say gold, like so, and then end quote. And then plus is how we concatenate two pieces of text together. So I'm going to have gold with the colon and the space. And then I'm going to have the number, which is how many we've actually collected. So that's going to be coins collected. And then once again, we need to select our player controller and drag that text game object, or text component rather, into the gold count slot. So now when I pick up my coins, my gold count goes up. And if I step on the damage trap, it takes my health down. And if I pick up a health potion, that takes my health back up. And when I pick up my key, I can use it to open the door. So that about covers it for different types of player feedback. So now we have interactions for picking up a coin, taking damage, regaining health from a health potion, and opening a door. And we have at least one form of player feedback for each of those things. So we have the health slider for damage and regaining health. We have a gold counter as well as a particle effect and sound effect when we pick up the coin. And we have the door animating to open when we walk up to it with the key. So that does it for this tutorial. I hope you've enjoyed it, and if you did, I hope you will like and subscribe so that you'll know when I get more tutorials uploaded. Thanks for watching.